So welcome, and especially to our wonderful supporter of Clinton PTA, Alicia Farrell, whose reputation has very fairly preceded her for how wonderful.
That's nice.
Yeah, you have a following. So if you ever need a place to go where everyone knows your name, come here.
They begin to hate me in Old Saybrook. I can move to Clinton.
You can move to Clinton. It might be out of the frying pan into the fire, but that's okay. Who is going to be talking to us tonight about raising a touchscreen generation. This is, over the course of the open houses at the various schools this year, we had a number of parents coming up to us saying that this was at the top of their list of concerns for their kids about how to manage their kids' screen time, tech time, just how to navigate these waters. And your last point of don't let the tech talk become the new sex talk just totally caught my eye. Because I was just talking to my students about the stuff we don't talk about properly with our kids, and this was one of them. So that's wonderful. So anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Alicia Farrell.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll just do a short introduction of my background, and then what I'd like to do is just do a quick round table, just find out what you guys are particularly interested in. So as I go through the talk, I'm sure to address your issues. I like to keep these very interactive, so I'm not going to just sit here and talk at you the whole time. I have a lot of material. We won't get to all of it. But, and you'll notice that, what I did with the handouts was I gave you, actually, there's two talks that I do that are around this topic. One is raising the touchscreen generation, and the other one is about the effects of pop culture and media on our children, specifically on drugs and alcohol use. So I included my handout for that as well. And then there are 2 pages of resources that you can use to get guidance, to get additional information, and also to advocate. So there are tons of organizations out there if you have an interest in getting involved in advocating for either an increased understanding of the effects of technology on our kids' development, and also things like how to control technology in the household and that sort of thing. So to give you a little bit of background, my first career was actually in marketing and public relations. I did 10 years in corporate America. And then I escaped just as quickly as I possibly could. I went back to graduate school and got my doctorate in cognitive psychology. And then I was a professor at George Mason University for 10 years. We moved, and that's down in Fairfax, Virginia. We moved up here. My husband grew up here in Old Saybrook. And we moved up here. It'll be 13 years. It'll be 13 years. It was 13 years in October. And that's when I started my private practice. So in addition to a lot of public speaking around the state of Connecticut, I also have a private practice in Old Saybrook that's quite generalized. So my youngest client right now is 12. The oldest client I've ever had is 98, who I had for 10 years. I started with her when she was actually 88. And she just passed away a couple summers ago. So, and I do a lot of family systems work. I work with couples. I work with individuals. You name it. So today, what we're talking about is how to raise these kids in this environment that we've been forced into through all of our brilliance. We're coming up with this technology that is making our lives very simple and very complicated all at the same time. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And the way I'd like to start the conversation is just to talk a little bit about, really how much we don't know. So one of the things that is true about raising kids with technology is that we don't really have a lot of knowledge about the effects that screen time has on our children. The research is in its infancy. It's very difficult to do. It's costly. To do good research in that area, you really have to do longitudinal studies where you're looking at groups of individuals over a length of time. So I am going to be presenting some research findings for you tonight. We have to look at them and kind of take some of those with a grain of salt until we know for sure what's actually going on. But there are some preliminary research results that are very troublesome troublesome with respect to brain development in kids and technology use, as well as socio-emotional development. So I'll tell you all about that tonight, in addition to a lot more. So how many of you guys know a toddler? Or know of a toddler? Okay. So toddlers are really, in this day and age, the first generation that will have been raised completely enmeshed in technology from the time they were born. And there are lots of different names for these individuals. The touchscreen generation, tech natives, we call them the app generation, the I generation. So when you guys are reading about research that's going on, you may see them referred to in that way. So really parenting and teaching this generation from birth is really throwing at us a lot of new developmental challenges. And we're lost. We're really kind of sailing this ship without a rudder. In addition to that, because our generation, I'm 53, so I'm in the baby boomer, or the last kind of one of the last tail end of the baby boomer generation. We got hit with technology at the time at which we were in our early adulthood. We've incorporated it into our lives, and we don't really know how to handle it either. So we're not setting very good, we're not very good role models for our children. So we've got a lot of challenges on our hands, and I think some of it comes down to just philosophically, I think as a culture, starting to understand that technology is not a lifestyle, it's actually a tool, and we're using it as a lifestyle, and our children are learning to live their lives with technology as a lifestyle instead of as a tool. Okay. So the American Academy of Pediatrics actually recommends, they have recommendations, and those recommendations are based on studies that have been done. And those recommendations are pretty clear, and that is that if you have a child that's 2 years old or younger, those individuals should not be exposed to any screen time. Any screen time. TV, iPad, iPhone, no screen time. And those kids over the age of 2 should only be in front of a screen for 2 hours a day. Now, that's almost impossible because they're getting screen time at school that's comparable to those 2 hours.
Over the age of 2 till what?
Till into their teen years.
And I'm sorry, well, how much time was that? Did you say?
No more than yeah. So no more than 2 hours.
Wow, okay.
So consider this. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation survey that was done in 2010, so 6 years ago, kids 8 to 18 spend an average of 7 hours a day between gaming and internet use in front of a screen. 7 hours a day. Okay, now the American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending no more than 2. Over the course of a year, this adds up to double the amount of time they spend in school.
Wow.
That's the reality of what we're facing. So let's take a look at the choices that we're making, okay, that we're making as adults with our children, despite the fact that we have these recommendations from the AAP. 75% of moms regularly hand smartphones to their toddlers. We see it all the time. Just, because why? It's a great parenting device because they get quiet, and they leave us alone, and they're occupied. 40% of 3-month-old infants regularly view screen media of some type. 40%. 30% of infants, this blew me away, 30% of infants a year or younger have TVs in their bedrooms.
Oh, God.
30%.
Still don't? Yeah, my building.
You want a potty seat with a built-in stand for an iPad? You can get one at Target
Yeah.
for about $37. So when
That's right where you went.
yeah, I know, really.
It's not your iPad, it's theirs. They have their own.
Oh. So we're making a lot of mistakes, and it doesn't make us bad people. It just makes us very confused about what's right and what's wrong in this day and age. And we get so much pressure. We get pressure from our children. We get pressure from the academic environment because they're incorporating technology into the learning. And that's not all bad. Technology is, as we know, not an evil thing. It's very powerful, and it can be a very effective tool to use with our children. But what we're not doing, for the most part, as adults, is controlling it, primarily in our homes. Okay, so here's what we do know, though. So there's a lot that we don't know about technology use in child development. But what we do know is that our attitudes and our values and our interests and behavior are in large part a product of our environment. We know that. We've known that for a long time. And there's no more delicate time for those influences to take place than in childhood. And what do we see? We see not only these kids spending all this time in front of a screen, but we also have concerns about what they're interacting with. And we'll talk about that a little later in the conversation. So these kids are actually being exposed like no other time in the history of our culture, being exposed to violence, to sex, to drugs, you name it, at very early ages. And one of the things that's causing, that's becoming a challenge for us as parents, is something called age compression. So what we're seeing now is that younger and younger kids are acting older and older because they're being exposed to things through all of these screens that are influencing their development. It's increasing their or speeding up their development. Although they don't have the emotional capacity or sophistication, nor do they have the cognitive sophistication to handle what's going on. So how is that a challenge to us as parents? It's a challenge because all of a sudden we are not the authority anymore. The authority is what's coming through the technology. And I see it in my practice. So I'll get a kid who's smoking marijuana, and they'll come in and they'll say, well, Dr. Farrell, I got on the internet last night, and I was looking at the Mayo Clinic website, and apparently marijuana actually reduces the likelihood that you'll get cancer. So if that's the case, then that's not, I mean, how could that be a bad thing for me to do? And I'm like, okay. And so then I counter with an article out of the Massachusetts General Hospital, and then they counter with an article, and here we go, back and forth. And I'm having a conversation like this with a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old. That's me. I mean, I'm an expert in that area. As a parent who doesn't know a lot about that topic, oh my gosh, all of a sudden you're not the authority anymore, and you don't know whether what that individual, that child, is telling you is true or not. And how are you going to have any authority over what they think when they have access to all of this information? So what we're finding is that the media and pop culture are parenting our children. And the power of that parenting usurps our power in a lot of situations. So it's not just the amount of time that these kids are spending in front of the screen, it's what they're getting out of that time that's also causing issues in our relationships with our kids and in their socio-emotional development. So it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Very complicated dynamic. Disney, I don't know if you guys read about that this recently. It just came out in the news. Disney just came out with an app. I think it's called Circle, and write it down because I don't have it on my resource page. It is it's a way of controlling all of your kids' devices. It's $100, and you can control every device they have without their ability to usurp it in some fashion, because these kids are, most of the security techniques out there, the security apps, these kids know how to get around, and they just Google it, and they're right around it, and you don't even know it. So you can not only control their devices, but you can also monitor everything that they're looking at, the amount of time they're spending on the device, where they're going with it, all that kind of stuff. So it's a sad reality, but that might be something, if you have a high-risk child or you just want to avoid the conflict with them, might be a good thing to do. Look into something like that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about brain development. This is one of my, if you guys have heard me speak before, I speak on brain development and marijuana use and alcohol use and technology. This is one of my really passionate areas because our kids' childhood during that period of time is such a sensitive time, brain development, and we're getting to know that more and more as the research comes out. And that sensitive period of development actually extends into their early 20s, early to mid-20s. So when your child goes away to college at 18, you think, I finally did it, you know. Now they're off to college and they're going to do what they're going to do, but at least, you know, I know their brains are, you know, kept them healthy. Well, in reality, their prefrontal cortexes continue to develop into their 20s, particularly the boys. We think that the boys' prefrontal cortex actually continues to develop past the age of 25, and some would suggest into the 50s. But I think my husband's, he's 59. I think his is still developing, but and he won't be watching this video. So. But I want to talk about brain development between the time of conception and into the early 20s, so that you guys start to understand how what you do with your brain over the course of this period of time influences the actual physical development of the brain, and not just the parts of the brain that are plastic, that in other words you can change and work on, like the white matter in your brain is not hard-coded. So the white matter in your brain allows you, let's say you get a stroke, for example, you have a stroke, and you can get back some of your abilities because your white matter is there's neuroplasticity. Your neurons can regrow, they can heal themselves, they can reconnect. But in the gray matter of the brain is making up your cerebral cortex and your prefrontal cortex. That gray matter is hardwired. So what your children are doing at any given point in their brain development is going to have an influence on how that gray matter develops. And how that gray matter develops is going to have an influence on their cognitive abilities throughout the remainder of their lives. So if we take something as straightforward as drug and alcohol use during sensitive periods of brain development, what we're finding with kids that are using really a very minimal amount of today's marijuana, which is very high in THC, is we're seeing actual structural changes in the prefrontal cortex. We're seeing a shrinkage of the gray matter. So their brains are actually shrinking rather than developing the way they need to. And how does that translate into their ability to function as they move into adulthood? They have a very difficult time with planning, any kind of executive functions. So planning, complex problem solving, decision making, memory, reaction time, information processing. And I'm seeing these kids in my practice. I'm seeing them on my couch. They're in college. They're struggling. They're having a very difficult time growing up. That's not to mention the socio-emotional impact of use of that sort of thing. So let's take a look at brain development. So when a woman conceives and this child is in utero, what happens right before a child is born is there's a period of what's called proliferation. And that's a period with which the brain produces all these nerve cells. And it's nerve cells. We have about 100 billion nerve cells in our brain. We think we may have even more than that. So right before birth, the brain's like, okay, I'm getting ready because I'm going to come out into the world and I want to learn. I want to start to be able to take everything in and understand everything that's going on around me. So that's the first period of proliferation, and we always thought that that was the only period of proliferation in a child's brain. Child's born. Now, once they're born, the brain cells start to die off, which is actually a very good thing. You don't want too many brain cells. In fact, we think that kids that have autism don't prune as effectively. Their brains don't prune as effectively after they're born, and that may be contributing to their inability to process as well as kids whose brains do. So cell death is an important part of brain development. So you have this pruning going on, and then right around your prepubescent years, the pruning stops, and there's another rush of proliferation. We didn't know this until very recently, that during pre-adolescence, the brain once again produces all of these new nerve cells. And what it's getting ready for is adolescence, because in adolescence now, we've got the hardwiring, the last stage of hardwiring of the brain. So think about what our kids are doing with their brains during this period of time, right? So a lot of kids are experimenting. A lot of kids are spending an enormous time in front of screens and on social media. So you take a brain, for example, that has been primarily stimulated through academics and through extracurricular activities and through conversations at the dinner table and through social engagement, face-to-face social engagement, I might add. And you look at that brain compared to a brain of a child who's spending 5 hours a day playing a violent video game, who's constantly on their phones with their heads down, they're not interacting socially face-to-face, maybe they don't have other extracurricular activities that they're engaged in, and you have a different brain. Okay, you have a different brain. And the differences in that brain are at that stage into those early 20s, hardwired. So now, what is that? So we have the immediate effects of that, and then we have the evolutionary effects. So the other thing that we are going to start to see with our brains is with the advent of technology, with the advent of multitasking at the degree that these kids do, we're going to see some evolutionary changes in the way that our brains are actually born into the world. We won't live to see that. That's going to happen over, thousands of millions of years. But we know now that certainly what you're doing with your brain at that stage in time is going to have a strong influence over the brain power that you have going forward into adulthood. Okay. You guys are all looking at me like, oh my God. I know. It's scary, right? Okay. Let's see here.
Yeah, I heard a thing on NPR about marijuana and how they're at least trying to get them to start later, because the longer they wait to start, the better it is for the brain.
So here's the rule. If you can get your kid to 21 without a dependence or an addiction on drugs and alcohol, you have a 95% likelihood that they won't have an addiction. So if you can get your kid to 21, my son is going to be 22 in January, so I feel like I'm there. Who knows what he's doing in college, but yeah. So not to take us off topic, but I took a relatively hard-line approach with my son in high school, and I drug tested him. I said, you know what? You're under my roof. It's my responsibility, and I'll just let you know I have the right to randomly drug test you at any point in time, and I'll do it if I feel like if I have any question whether or not you're doing drugs, because it's not going to happen on my time. When he went to college at 18, we sat him down and we said, "You're old enough to go to war. Go figure it out. Do what you got to do." And if whatever you're doing is influencing your performance in college, and you're not finding your way the way you need to, and we're here to love and support you, obviously. But if it becomes an issue, then we're not going to pay for that. We're not going to pay $45,000 a year for you to go get high every day. So, figure it out. That isn't the approach for all parents. It isn't the approach for every child. But I think in this day and age, it's something that we need to consider. What it did allow me to do, by the way, my husband and I, is it allowed us to let Clay go out on a Friday night and we just said, have a good time, make good choices. Whatever you got to do, right? And we need to be able to do that too. We need to be able to let go of our children. And that's a challenging thing to do in this day and age because there seem to be so many threats, so many ways for them to make mistakes that are going to impact their future. And so we felt, my husband and I felt, as if this was a great way for us to allow us to let go and allow Clay to go out and be independent and figure things out for himself. So,
can I add to that? Only because I've had this conversation with Alicia before. Based on her sharing that with me, I had a conversation with my son about how would you feel about that if I did that, and his response to me was that actually would be my out for not participating, because I can say,
yeah. And that's exactly. In fact, I'll tell you, I just started working with a 25-year-old young man, very bright, struggling, and he said to me, I told him this story because he was a marijuana smoker from early on, and I told him this story about my son, and he said, I wish my parents had done that because I wouldn't be in the place I'm in today.
Because one of the biggest risk factors for engaging in dangerous behavior is not being on people's radars. Because kids are very quick at figuring out who's going to notice if they're there or not there.
Yeah.
If they're tuned in or if they're checked out, and if no one cares, then it's very easy to engage in that behavior.
Yeah.
But if someone's watching you, if that possibility exists, it's a much less compelling path to take.
Absolutely. And there's a great website, drugtestyourteen.com. You can get tests that'll test for alcohol, test for opiates, test for marijuana. So we are, we live in these affluent, beautiful towns here along the shoreline. And I'm sure, as you all know, we're inundated with drugs. Heroin, marijuana, pills. I mean, it's really of great concern.
I do have a question. So one of the first reactions I had was my son might say, Mom, you don't trust me. And so what would be your recommendation for the kid who responds like that?
Yeah. So what I said to my son was, honey, it's not about trust. It's about respect. And I respect you and I respect your development. And I have a responsibility as a parent to do everything I can to protect you until you can take care of yourself. And so I've made this choice. And I have to tell you that it was the best decision we made, one of the best parenting decisions we made. One of the reasons was, in addition to being able to let him go, was the few times that we did test him and he tested negative, he was so proud of himself. He was like, I'm bad. When we asked him, when we said, okay, we're going to test you, and he just grabbed the pee cup and he was like, walked in the bathroom, came out, we tested him, he was positive, and he was like, and so it gave us an opportunity in that moment to reinforce with him how awesome his choices were. Like, we are so proud of you. I mean, how mature of you to be able to say no in these situations we know you're being faced with. So it gave us lots of really cool opportunities to parent.
And were you also able to do the 2 hours of screen time?
So,
were you successful?
yeah, so good question. So when my son was in 8th grade, I think he was in 8th grade, we broke down and bought him an Xbox. And it lasted about 3 months. And we were walking through the living room one day, and he was playing some, let's kill everybody game. And my husband and I walked down, and I said, this does not feel right to me. And my husband said, doesn't feel right to me either. And the next morning we sat Clay down and said, look, we're really sorry. We made a mistake. We're selling your Xbox.
Wow.
And
My
that was
kids never had.
and that was it. He didn't have one from that point. Now he could go to friends' houses and play, but what we did do is we redid our basement, and we set it up like a little clubhouse, and it's not a finished room. It's a cellar, which was perfect because they couldn't hurt it down there. And we put up a ping pong table and a pool table, and we had music down there, and we had a television down there. They could watch movies if they wanted to. And I'll tell you, that became the spot. Kids came over, they went down, and what they didn't know was that we could hear every word they said. So we were upstairs in the living room reading with the fire going like, oh my God. But yeah, so that's what we
And
did.
so you were successful at that too? I mean, sometimes even just with her homework, my son's at college now, so, however much time he spends looking at a screen, I have no clue, but, she loves to watch The Office on Netflix, my daughter, and then, do her homework. So it's kind of a lot of screen time.
Yeah, I had the same question because then there's the screen time at school, and
Right, and there's that
our
too,
town isn't as wealthy as some of the other shoreline towns, but some of the other shoreline towns are having sort of like the iPad for every kid now,
Right.
or the the Chromebooks, and that's a lot of screen time. Kids are typing their notes directly into these devices now.
Yeah.
They could hit 2 hours so easily in the first half of the school day. So, is there research on if there's is there a differentiation between different kinds of screen time?
So screen time that's being used, screen time that you might be experiencing because you're doing homework, for example. So you're learning through the course of your screen time is a little bit different than screen time where you're just surfing around, whether you're watching videos on YouTube, you're engaging with social media. So the way what we did was, and this is what was recommended in all the literature that I read. First of all, no TV and no computer and no phone in the bedroom. So if you want to have all the technological devices somewhere where everyone else is present. So we had a computer in the family room, and that's where Clay did his homework. That's where he engaged. He didn't go to bed with his phone. He didn't go to bed with his iPad when he had one, which wasn't until he was, I think, a senior in high school. So his room was technologically free until he went off to college. Because here's what's happening with the kids, and you don't know what's happening because you're sleeping, but they're interacting with their peer groups through the entire night. So there are texts going back and forth. If they wake up in the middle of the night, they get on their device, their smartphone, and they start surfing around and watching YouTube videos, and then they're up until 4 in the morning, and then they sleep for an hour, and then they're really tired, and then they get anxious because they're not getting their work done, and then they end up coming to me, and I start asking them questions like, well, yeah, you're tired. I mean, my God, you're only getting 3 hours of sleep a night. In addition to all the other things that they're doing, which these kids have a lot on their plates with schoolwork. So,
I teach at Jared Elliott Middle School here, and I do talk to the 8th graders about this, turning off the cell phone during the night, and they think it's totally ludicrous that you would not respond to text, or that you would to turn it off, at night. It's just the 8th graders are.
That's
They're-
very
they're-
about parenting.
It is. They're there. They're like, oh yeah.
So
So-
we adopted a
Yeah,
rule
I know,
of
but it's-
electronics on the kitchen counter,
Quinn's starting to
No.
go back.
9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Done.
They go to bed.
yeah, that's
The
Yeah.
electronics go to bed,
Yeah,
yeah, we do the same thing.
Downstairs.
yeah.
Yes.
We do allow the Kindle for reading.
Oh, sure.
And our son, he's very good about that. And I obviously I check on him, and he's,
It's actually reading.
So is
Well,
there
that's all I
no
need
screen
to know.
time though?
So reading, if you're reading, if you're reading a book on
Yeah.
Kindle, that's fine.
That wouldn't be considered
Not
screen
right.
time then.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to figure it out too, like some of the other questions of, so if they're working on some word processing for homework or
Fine.
graphs,
Yeah.
is that counted as part of the 2 hours?
No, so
Okay.
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear about that. So the 2 hours we're talking about is really 2 hours of video game interaction or internet interaction. It's that,
Or
that
like texting probably too,
the
right?
pointless, mindless sort of screen time. So
How
if
about
they're
watching The Office?
that can actually be a real nice release because that's a funny show.
My daughter watches that.
And
every day.
So then I guess it brings down to the about the educational apps.
Jessica's too Parks and Rec. She's upset.
Yeah,
it's like,
so
Where's the line?
okay, so this is a really good question. The question is, what about these educational apps? All right, so here's the deal with educational apps. There's no research out there that any of these educational apps are effective at teaching our children anything. So
They're not.
they market them that way.
Except for how to buy apps.
Yeah, except for how to buy apps, exactly. They'll market them that way. But the truth of the matter is, there's no app out there that is going to teach your children any better than any other teaching method. So and that's, we get stuck as parents of really younger children, like little kids, and we get all this influx from the media saying, oh, you got to get this app, it's going to help your child read, or even Sesame Street now, they're finding that kids that spend too much time in front of the television watching Sesame Street have language delay issues. So, and you would never think of that.
Because they're not
as
actually
the case.
practicing their language.
They're not actually doing
I took
what they
such a
need to
professional
do.
offense to my baby can read. Like
Yeah.
every time that commercial would
Oh,
come on,
right,
it would
right,
turn my
right.
stomach. I was like,
We're preschool
So
teachers,
upset.
and we had conferences all week, and I don't know about you, but every parent was so proud about all the apps they have for their kids. I'm like, just play with them, talk
Just
to
play,
them,
exactly.
read to them, play to them, talk to them, have dinner with them.
Exactly.
with them.
Yeah, yeah. Because let's talk briefly about some of the socio-emotional effects that we're seeing with kids that are spending too much time. All right, so this is. All right, so more than 1 to 2 hours a day of screen exposure in early childhood has been connected to certain socio-emotional issues. And this comes out of a campaign for commercial-free childhood at the National Institutes of Mental Health.
I love that. I read that in here and I was like, campaign for commercial-free childhood.
Isn't that awesome? So here's what we're finding with kids, young kids that have spent more than an hour or two a day in front of the screen. Higher levels of aggression, sleep disturbances, so difficulty falling asleep and also difficulty staying asleep. Weight problems, particularly obesity. Lower math and school achievement. Shorter attention spans. Delayed language acquisition. Hyperactivity. Emotional and behavioral problems. Difficulties with peers. So kids that spend too much time in front of the screen are more likely to bully than children that don't. Reduction in self-control and issues with memory. Okay. So one of the things that, and let me just segue into something, we'll jump back to something in a second. So there are three general deficits that we're seeing with our children these days. And these deficits are really generalized across our kids. One is a play deficit, and I'll explain to you in a second what these are. One's a play deficit, one's a problem-solving deficit, and one's a compassion deficit. Okay? So, play, as we know and as you guys know, is vital to children's development. Kids learn everything they need to learn by playing. They improve their problem-solving skills, their negotiating skills, they learn to connect, they learn to trust, they learn everything they need to know at those young ages through the act of playing. So increased screen time with this highly realistically media-linked toys is making it difficult for children to learn to play and to learn to play creatively. So I don't know if you guys have heard about the new Barbie that's coming out. Have you heard about this new
She has
Barbie?
different dimensions.
Realistic Barbie.
Well, wait till you hear what this is. This is horrifying. So they're coming out with this new Barbie, and this new Barbie is basically has a computer in it. It has software in it, apps, that connects to the corporation, Mattel or whoever makes this Barbie. And here's what happens. The child talks to the Barbie, and what they say to the Barbie is transmitted to somebody at the company who then
Are they in
programs.
Bangladesh, though, or are they in
Well, we don't know.
On the other end?
So then the Barbie actually responds to the child based on what they're saying. So the child starts to have an
Now you don't even have to
actual
talk to your kids anymore.
conversation.
Not an imaginary friend.
This toy is coming out.
This sounds like a great script for a horror movie.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I actually went to the dark side with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't know who this person is
Yeah.
who's interacting with your child.
Yeah, and what their motivation
What they're
is for wanting to
saying
be
based on what,
creepy.
yeah. Yeah, this is creepy.
But yet the
And it's
kids
taking
are
the
growing
whole
up in this
imagination
world that,
element
like my
out of
kids,
it.
I have 3 boys,
That was the whole point when
and
you had
I
a
try and
Barbie
set
was
pretty
you
strict
imagine
rules from what
what
they
no batteries.
think. But I'm getting a lot of pushback from my 15-year-old, a lot, where I need to make an appointment with you, I think, at this point. And because in their world, it's so okay. And it's like we're in 2 different worlds, and
Yeah.
I am alarmed.
Amy, I missed what you said. What are you saying?
I'm just saying, like, it's almost as if, especially with Quinn, my oldest, you know, that we're live in 2 different worlds. Because I try and make strict rules. I have strict rules, but I'm getting a lot of pushback lately. And I get that. That's normal textbook teenage stuff. Mom, you're ruining my life. Mom, you're doing that. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, I think that's good. You know, I think I'm doing a good job. But it's a lot of pushback where I'm like, I'm lost a little bit. And I feel like he's on Mars and I'm still on Earth. And it's like, wow, okay, is this just the world changing and I need to change with it? Or do I need to keep these lines? You know what I mean? I'm confused.
I know, it's hard, isn't it? Especially when these kids are pushing back as hard as they do, and you
they push
feel,
back hard.
and they
Smart
tell
to
you
do.
that, oh, I'm not going to fit in. I can't, you know, well then I
Yeah.
can't communicate with my friends. And you're feeling as a parent, oh my God, I don't want them to feel alienated. I want them to be part of the
Everybody has
group.
Snapchat, Mom.
Yeah,
You're
but
turning me into a freak like that.
I was even surprised. He's 15, going on 16. So he has a phone, and we had a rule for a while: you can't take it to school. But then we broke that rule because I was like, who cares? You can't use it at school. It's in his bag. But I just found out I must be like a little behind. They text during classes.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know this? Am I like? I mean, I just went there because I periodically try and check it. This is just in the past like 3 days where I was like, oh, I've been out to lunch, I guess. I mean, they're texting when they have class. And, I mean, he's a great student, but I'm like, I mean, I guess I can't assume that the teachers are patrolling this, but I just thought that it was in their bags. What?
yeah,
What? I mean, wow, I'm just, it's
They're allowed
this is,
to have them in the at Morgan
Yeah.
anyway. They're allowed to have them until the bell rings to signaling the actual start of the class.
yeah.
That doesn't mean kids put them away when the bell rings, but the teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, most
Well,
of the
that's what I
classes
would
that I
think.
go to.
But they
the
must
teacher
be under the,
says-
because I just read a whole slew of texts that were during the whole school day.
Right.
And I was just like, am I seeing the time that I'm seeing? And they were like, which class are you in? Which class are you? Horrified. Like,
Can you imagine how
help.
to teach that?
Mm. Well, that's what I was, because that's something that I definitely find, going back to the whole beneficial screen time versus not, is the number of my students who are taking notes on laptops, which seems very technologically advanced and efficient, until you realize you've now put a barrier
Right.
between them and me.
Right.
And this is, instead of them actually thinking about what we're talking about, they're like this the whole time. So I'm like, excuse me.
yeah.
You know, because otherwise I can't I don't know that they're actually learning anything. They might do fine on the test, but I don't know what they're learning because I can't see what their engagement is. I can't see what they're actually learning.
It's funny you mention that because someone here, I don't know, maybe one of my Facebook friends in this room posted something just recently about a mother who's decided to sit down and watch her 2 sons play on the floor. and marked down every time the kids looked up at her for some kind of positive feedback. Within a matter of like a half an hour, there were 28 times the kids looked up at them, just to get,
Yeah.
are you watching, or
Yeah.
make connections.
What age
And she
kids?
said, oh, I don't know, they were probably,
Little?
younger, probably less than 10. And she said, imagine if she'd been sitting there on her phone doing all this kind of stuff and would have missed those 28 connections. So I'm wondering how much of the
Good.
stuff these kids are learning.
Yeah, and they
People around
do,
the table, I don't know.
they learn a lot from us.
Good and bad,
So
actually.
listen to
I'm
this
sure it doesn't
quote.
happen to anybody here, I just thought it's mentioned.
Listen to this quote. This is from a teacher who is describing this play deficit that the kids have. It's harder and harder to have free play in my classroom. Some children can't cope with the lack of structure. They roam around the room dabbling with this and that, rarely getting involved in any activity for long. When they do, it often quickly dissolves into conflict. I've stopped putting out some of the more traditional play materials like Play-Doh. Children don't do much with it. They just poke at it and then go on to something else. It's often easier to plan structured activities that I lead. Most of the kids do what I tell them to do. I worry about what they aren't learning when I do that. So the other thing that's happening with our children is that every environment that they're in is adult-centered. And you combine that with the influence of technology, their interaction with technology, and they can't think for themselves. They don't know how to problem solve. They don't know how to just sit down and take an inanimate object and do something interesting with it. They don't have the creativity. There's a preschool in Old Saybrook, and the woman who owns it said that kids are coming in now and they don't know how to play with blocks. You sit down with them and they don't know what to do with them. You have to show them.
My 15-year-old plays with Legos.
Just a quick connection on that. There was a movie, I know we sponsored it. I don't know if it was one Waiting for Superman, but one of those that came out. And there were two things I took away from that. One was let's reconsider homework, whether or not that's important. And the second thing was the value of free play.
Yeah.
So the next day I went to my classroom, and it was an 8th grade class, and I said, it's a beautiful day outside. I got access to the backyard. Let's go outside and play. They were all excited. I said, so what do you guys want to do? And right away they wanted some type of equipment to go out and play a game. I said, no. So I said, let's sit down. And I said, what would you do if you went out there? And nobody could tell me what they would do. I said, you know what? We're not going outside then. As a kid, you'd lie down, you'd look at the clouds, you'd pick up grass, you'd look for, do something. But they just could not think of something that they would want to do besides playing something structured outside.
Yeah.
And I think that's 100% correct, that they don't have that ability. And I don't know where that came from, where they lost how to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got a talk that I do on overparenting, on helicopter parenting, that I'd be happy to come back and do for you guys sometime. But I get into the history of overparenting, why it is that we've gotten into this mode where these kids are now so tied to us for their structure and guidance. And it's pretty fascinating how it all came about. And it actually started with Adam Lanza. Do you remember Adam? When he was abducted back in the early 1980s, and then his father started America's Most Wanted. And we went from this very innocent culture here in the United States as parents, where we let our kids go off, 1950s kids like be home for dinner. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh my God, the world is full of people that are going to abduct or hurt my child. Because there was a movie that was put out called Adam, and it was about what happened. 38 million people in this country saw that movie. And because the baby boomer generation is so big, anything that happens in our generation creates a trend, immediately creates a trend. And that was one of the trends that began. The other was that mothers were flooding into the workplace. And so all of a sudden play had to become structured because there was limited time and it had to be supervised. So we got the play date going, right? And the play date started out with kids just playing, and then it was parents sitting there watching the children play, and then it was parents getting involved in the children's play. And all of a sudden we're involved in everything that these kids do. And they don't know we're stealing their childhood. They don't know how to be children anymore. And so
Of course, the schools are taking free time away because of testing and those things. That's a whole other issue. we're not gonna
Right,
get into tonight,
exactly.
but we just lost kindergarten. I mean, not kindergarten. We lost recess in 6th grade.
Yeah,
I think 7th and 8th graders need to get out there and run around and burn off the energy
absolutely.
and do nothing at the playtime. But
Yeah.
that's not going to happen.
So then, you know, it's interesting. We had in Old Saybrook, we've had two events in the last month where we've had a panel of kids from the high school, and we've had an opportunity to just pick their brains and ask them, you know, how are you doing? What you doing? What's going on? How, you know, what stresses you out? And every single one of those kids on that panel said, in answer to the question, what stresses you out, they said, I've got too much to do. I cannot get it all done. And every day I'm freaked out that I'm not going to get it done. And then we went from talking about that. And so they're saying, you know, this one lady last week was saying, so I came home from school at 2:30. I did homework until 5. I had dinner. Now I'm here sitting on this panel. I'm going to get home at 8:30 tonight. I've got another 2 or 3 hours of homework left to do before I go to bed. I'll go to bed at 11. I'll get up at 5. I mean, these kids sound like adults. It's really troublesome. Then we started talking to them about substance use. And they were explaining to us, they said, look, you need to understand that that's like one of the only things we have to relax. We're so stressed out. We're so anxious. We're so maxed out. You know, we got to be perfect. We've got to get good grades. We've got all our future is dependent upon all this stuff that we have to do right now. And if we don't do it just right, then we've got the message that we're not going to be successful. And so...
You don't think that's a function of parenting and the values that a family has and how they...
So it's a function of parenting, but I think I'm also very compassionate towards the parents because they're sort of trapped in the middle. So the parents, and I'm sure all of you struggle with this too, because
Oh, that's really helpful.
I know that I struggled with this as a parent, and that is that you're getting pressure from particularly the higher institutions, right? That they're evaluating our children on these levels, and they've got to have resumes to get into the good universities and and so we're hearing all of this, and we're having children, and from the time they're born, we're hijacking their childhood. We're saying, okay, we got this checklist here, and we're going to get through this checklist between now and the time you're 18, and then you get to go to college, and trust me, you're going to go to college, you're going to go to a good college, you're going to get a great education at this college, and when you graduate, if you survive all of that, then you're going to get a really good job, and you're going to live happily ever after. And these kids get out of college, if they make it through college, because they're so fried, and they can't get a job, or they get a job making $30,000 a year, and they have $60,000 in loans, which, by the way, I found out the other day one of my clients has $60,000 in student loans, and he's paying $1,700 a month on these loans. $1,700 a month on these loans? He can't go anywhere, do anything. He can't move out. He's got to stay at home. And you know, and part of that is because you take these loans out separately, and the government won't consolidate the loans. So you're paying on each loan, and so anyway, yeah, so anyway, so these kids were saying, they were talking about their substance use, and they were impressing upon us the fact that, look, I mean, I smoke pot because it's the only time I get to just get out of my head, because otherwise it's constant. And how does that relate to what we're talking about tonight? It relates because not only are they constantly engaged with responsibility, but they're constantly plugged in too. So it's this flow of pressure and flow of expectations and flow of information.
But they would argue that that's their downtime.
Right,
That's their...
They would argue that. I would argue to you that whatever they're doing, so much of it is socializing, which ends up being very stressful, because they're not just, it's not all just a bunch of happy stuff that's going on there. There's a lot of back and forth and, bullying and this and that and the other going on as well. And they're trying to come across because they're forming their identities through technology.
Right. That's
So
brutal.
it's brutal. Yeah.
Because there's no
emotion link to it.
exactly. They
Yeah.
have they misinterpret so much.
Yeah, and it also, so one of the deficits is a compassion deficit. So screen time takes away from learning how to interact with others in the real world. So the children learn empathetic skills through compromise, through compassion, through understanding, through interacting with other individuals, other human beings. And those are real world experiences that develop those skills. You don't develop those skills over social media.
But let me say this. If they're all doing that, and it's a whole generation, they're all going to be the same. Like, now I'm starting to think, okay, so you pull them and you make them, better, like the way we think it should be. But there's this mass amount of people becoming this other way.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting when you fast forward a bunch of years, right? Because you wonder if the people that are learning the compassion and are off the screen or whatever, they're going to be the misfits in a way.
I'll tell you though, I'll tell you what's happening, and it may be this may be happening because our generation is still in charge at corporate level, but the kids that are getting hired and that are successful as adults are the kids that have these skills, not the kids that know how to do all of this.
Yeah, you hope it goes back to the human nature, right? I mean,
Because you can't.
knowing how to be compassionate, knowing how to have all that.
I'll tell you, and when we're putting my son's resume and LinkedIn site and all that together, we're emphasizing the fact that he has values. He can communicate.
Yeah.
He can interact. He can solve conflicts. I mean, these are the skills that are going to become where we used to take those for granted, right?
Right.
They are going to become the value that the individual brings, the younger individual brings.
A couple of years back, we had that STEM presentation across the street.
Yeah.
We had the people that owned the different companies that
Yeah.
came in and spoke.
Right.
And I remember one of the gentlemen said, it's not what you know, it's what you can do. And that's what he asked people. I know what you know, it says here, but what
Right.
on your resume,
Right.
what can you do? And I think that's kind of what you're hitting on there.
Exactly.
And
You need to know.
ironically, one of those leaders also said that went back to the exact same thing, the playtime, that the students who will do best in science and technology, engineering and math are those who are able to play, or they are able to do,
And
play
teamwork.
And wasn't that part of aiming towards a new high school too? Like, what do we want to see in the new high school in terms of STEM?
Yeah.
And they said we need places where the kids can go in and just,
Well, look at
be
Google.
creative.
Look at Google, look at Yahoo, look at
Environments.
Zappos, you look at all of those, and it's like, oh my gosh, look at that. They have nap pods. Why would they do that? Because they're brilliant. Because they figured out if you allow stuff like that to happen in your workplace, you're going to have happier, more productive workers. Because you're just gonna, they have ping pong tables and they have all this stuff set up, so it's there to play. So if they're stuck, they can go brainstorm while shooting pool, and they don't even leave their workplace. It's brilliant.
It's brilliant. Yeah, how simple, right?
I
Oh
remember
my
you
gosh.
talking about your son rollerblading around the.
Yeah, that's how he used to
Yeah,
study.
that's great.
He used to rollerblade in the house. Yeah.
What do you say, Amy?
Yeah, maybe I'll do that.
I'll tell you what, if you stop texting during class, I'll let you rollerblade.
So I have a question. I think my one challenge is, and I think our kids are smart enough to kind of process this, is how do we get them, we understand all this,
Yeah.
but how do we get them at a young enough age to appreciate, I better, start thinking like this and realize that some of these other things I should be doing are more important than, some of the
So-
things that right now are school peer pressure or whatever.
So here are my suggestions along those lines. First of all, we have to be the role models. So they have to see us unplug. They have to see us put our stuff away. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We have, as parents, a lot of responsibility to try to infuse this fundamental value-based perspective into our children. So another thing that you can do is to get your kids out of the house, away from technology.
Yep.
Get them out hiking. Get them out just doing a whole lot of nothing, and force them to leave. Like when we would go golfing, my son couldn't bring his phone. It's like, no, you're not doing that. You know, that's not what we're doing. We're golfing. So leave your phone in the car. You can catch up on all that stuff later. Same thing with hiking. We took them on a trip to Europe, and no technology for 2 weeks.
We do it at dinner too. We go out to dinner, just the two of us.
Yeah.
No phones.
Yeah.
We
Dinner.
talk to each other.
I'll tell you, sports does it too, because even the
Sports.
pressure of, but there's a downside to it too. For instance, park and rec, if you do park and rec or travel soccer, you have to do park and rec soccer. And then 3 weeks into soccer, they started the travel basketball. So talk about pressure. We're Saturdays and Sundays are filled with these sports. So we're trying to, we want our daughter to experience dance. So we're, at this age, and I'm talking 5th grade and 8th grade, it should be allowing kids to experiment in different ways. And the ways these sports are getting so serious earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like they're
Yeah.
over-structured, and you can't, if they just let them experience different.
Everything is adult-oriented.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
all
right.
adult-led
I mean, I can
now.
understand that at high school level, but not the.
And I'll tell you that, I did a talk for you guys years ago, 3 years ago, on boys.
Yeah.
And just to reinforce this, so the girls are doing a lot better in this day and age, academically and otherwise, because they're girls. They can sit, they can pay attention, they can engage and learn by hearing. Boys, on the other hand, by nature, and I'm generalizing, there's certainly exceptions to this, but in general, the way that the world is operating right now is not conducive to a boy developing into a man. Because boys learn through doing and through making mistakes and through just getting out there and figuring things out for themselves, and they don't have that opportunity. They're being led everywhere, in the classroom, on the sports field, you name it. They're inundated with structure and guidance. And you see the effects of this. I'd be curious what your opinion is on this. But you see the effects of this with these boys when they try to transition into adulthood, into being a man. They are floundering. They are just floundering. They're depressed. They're having serious anxiety. They don't know how to be. And we're really doing our young boys a disservice. It's really sad.
We are planning, Alicia, to have in April a co-sponsored event, but on the film The Mask You Live In, and then having a community conversation after that. Exactly what you're saying.
It's funny you mention that because, again, it just seems like the stuff goes around. It's cyclical every 10, 20, 30 years. But I can remember about 20 years ago showing a video, had a woman from Southern Connecticut, a professor who was in one of these videos that I was showing. And she was talking about the difference between boys and girls. And she said that, boys do and girls are.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me just the opposite, that boys need to be and girls need to do, because boys, don't have the ability to, as you were saying. And I can certainly see that, but who knows?
Yeah.
So, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and so I'm reading this here. Screen time. She's always on her phone, or like I say, watching Netflix, and she does a lot of homework too. And so, they talk about picking your battles. I'm like, okay, as long as her homework gets done, I guess I'm not going to worry too much about the other. But I'm looking at this. Well, she definitely has sleep disturbances. Seems like higher levels of aggression. She's doing well in math and school and stuff. Definitely reduction of self-control. I don't know whether these things are hormonal
yeah.
or they have to do with screen time.
The answer is yes.
My experiences, I've been more challenged with now our daughter being, on the screen time with less, like, at least our son was, Minecraft and some things that would make him use his brain, where she gravitates more towards the TV, all that, the History Channel, so that's good, but I find that battle there of, and our son is the other way.
Yeah, the boys tend to gravitate towards the video games.
But even less screen time in our employment.
She gets very defensive when I try to talk to her, when my husband or I try to talk to her about screen time, especially, after, say, 9 o'clock, like you say, in her room. She has her phone in her room. She doesn't have a computer. She doesn't have anything else. But she does have her phone, and, she says she puts it on Do Not Disturb after 9 o'clock because she says she needs her phone for her alarm.
Hey, her phone is her computer. She's kidding you. She's pulling the wool over your eyes.
Yeah, the phone's a computer these days.
Right. And so,
right.
I'm not sure how I would approach a conversation about how she might not be aware, you might not be aware of the impact.
So we as parents have to take charge. So you don't necessarily have to convince her.
Put that in quotes and blame it on her. It's not your idea, it's her idea.
Yeah, really.
Blame it on her.
Just don't give her my address. I don't want my house egg. But we're not going to convince our teenagers that any of this is true or relevant to them in any fashion. You have to decide as a family where your boundaries are going to be, and then you have to decide how you're going to implement those boundaries. So if you seriously don't want her on technology after 9 o'clock, then turn the internet off. And then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if she's got her smartphone, if she's got her computer, if she has what.
She's in her
That's
data
true.
package.
We
You
have
gotta be careful.
Wi-Fi, so I guess my husband could just turn the
Just
Wi-Fi
turn the
off.
Wi-Fi
Yeah, but
off.
they
Without
built their
that.
own thing.
The data package, careful, you're going to hit your data then.
Yeah, then you're going to hit your
What's
data.
that?
Yeah.
You're going to hit
No,
your
the
data.
My
phones are
husband
gonna
and
use
I
their
don't use
data.
the
And you're,
Wi-Fi.
but if you have your data thing on there, it's kind of,
Yeah, but then she won't be able to.
Right.
Because
You'll be able to see
the
that
plan
thing.
that we have
Right.
is like so low, so she relies on
Okay.
the Wi-Fi
Oh.
to be able to
Yeah.
access data.
but part of what you said too, because you talk about brain development, I talk to my kids in the middle school about that all the time. We're just talking about that. Even the thing with the sleep patterns, like they say that, with the, the serotonin, I think
Yeah.
the one that goes in, one kicks in the morning to wake you up, one kicks in at night. And they said, whereas it kicks in for us around 10 or 11, for these kids it's not kicking in until 12 or 1. They also
Melatonin.
said, melatonin. Then also hook that into the fact that they're probably being stimulated by what they're on. So they're up until 2 or 3 o'clock, which, and again, next scene shows the kids sleeping on their desks in school,
And
which
then we
brings up
start
the point
high school
later.
earliest.
Right, and we're
As
supposed to
opposed
start
to
it
the
later, so it brings
kindergartners
up a
that pop out
whole
of bed like
nother
a Pop-Tart at 6 o'clock in the
plethora
morning.
of
And then we wonder
problems.
why our high school students are looking at us like,
Right.
through
right.
glazed eyes.
So
all
we
the
have to
time.
look at that. Their brain development is definitely different than ours. and
Totally.
They look at it different. I mean, there's been studies where they show pictures of kids' emotions, and the kids can't pick out the same emotions because they don't see it. And I said maybe that explains why my clean room was different from what my son's clean room looked like. I'm not seeing it the same way he's seeing it. With him it was three piles. Clean, dirty, and I'm not sure. With me, it was like everything's clean, put away, hung up. That's what a clean. But I see it that way, and they see it. So maybe we have to kind of, vive la différence or something, and try to see it somewhat from their way, but also
Absolutely.
give them some structure. So I don't know what all that means, but it just means that they're different,
Well,
we're different.
What it
And
means
it
is
can
that
be like they're from Mars sometimes. Right?
Yeah, and what it means is that you don't want to take an authoritarian approach to parenting. I'm not suggesting that you make rules about everything and you have this is how it works and this is what you're going to do, and it doesn't work. It's not healthy for children. It increases aggression and anger. It's not healthy for their socio-emotional development or their problem-solving development, decision-making abilities. What you want to do is have an authoritative approach to parenting. And what you do with an authoritative approach is you decide as a family what your values are. You establish what those hard stops are. So you pick them carefully because you don't want to inundate your children with a lot of hard stops because they need room. They need room to shuck and jive. So you decide as a family what's most important to you, and you communicate that to your kids. You establish those expectations. You establish consequences and boundaries. And then you let the rest just sort of let them sort of work things out for themselves. If you have conflict with them beyond those hard stops, and you need to engage with them on the level of problem solving to help them learn how to think about the issues in their lives, so that they can come up with solutions themselves. And they're it's really just it really becomes, you become in those moments more of a mentor than you do a parent. So you ask questions rather than dictate to them. So you ask questions like, well, what do you think you're going to do about that D you got on your chemistry exam? Well, I'm not sure. Well, what are some of your options? Let's just talk about what your options are. Not, oh my God, you got a D on your chemistry exam? What the hell were you thinking? And so I guess you're grounded and you're going to be studying every night chemistry for the next 2 weeks. No, that doesn't solve the problem for them. You want them to figure out what the solution is. So it's that delicate balance between staying in control and letting go at the same time. And that is going to be different for each and every one of us in our households. And it's going to be different based on, if you have multiple children, based on the kids that you have. You may have a very calm, very easy child, and then you may have maybe a child that's very high risk, that likes to take chances, and that's very spirited. And that child may need different parenting than the other child. So, and that all applies to everything we're talking about tonight with technology as well. Some kids can handle the technology very well themselves, and they don't need boundaries. They figure it out, and they actually use it for very healthy purposes.
So I was going to ask, are you suggesting that technology is a hard stop? Like, is that one of what we should really be focusing on as a hard stop?
It depends on the family. I really see. This is where I hesitate to ever say anything is black and white when it comes to these sort of nebulous issues, because what's right for me is not going to be right for somebody else. What I want you to do tonight is to take this information and consider how it applies to your family. So you now know that there's a good chance that technology use influences brain development. So decide what you feel is appropriate in your household for the amount of time that your children should spend in front of a screen. We can all do better at setting limits to the amount of time our kids are spending in front of a screen. All of us can do better at that. So find where that is for you, and try it out. See if it works for you. See if it works for your children.
Do you engage them in that process, or depends on the age, or what is your...
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely can engage them. I mean, I enjoyed doing that with my son. I enjoyed engaging him in that problem-solving process. Certain things we would just say to him, like when it came to drugs and alcohol, that was a hard stop for us. We were just like, I'm sorry, it's not going to, if you find a way to get around the limitations that we place for you, well then good on you. and that's great. And they will find it, and I'm sure he did. And good for him, because that's what teenagers are doing at that stage as well. But he understood that that was a hard stop in our household, and that there would be consequences associated with that. Yeah. And all of this, all of these hard stops can come back to bite you too, because the kids are they're going to evaluate your behavior based on these as well. So be ready for that. So when they're trying to have a conversation with you and you're like, oh, just a second, they're going to say to you, Mom. So you need to be prepared to also, honor those boundaries yourself.
We call them non-negotiables, and if it's a non-negotiable, it's a non-negotiable. I was just telling my students the other day that Sarah was 2, and I had my cup of Dunkin's tea in the car, and she said, but Mom, you're drinking and driving. That's against the law. And I said, you know what? you're right, because in a 2-year-old mind, she doesn't understand that. And I only just started drinking in the car again recently, because she
She's
now
telling everyone she's
understands.
drinking and
Yeah, I
driving.
know, right? You know what my mom does?
But is it tea? That's my question.
It is. But that's why, because I figured out it's either a non-negotiable or it's not. And for a 2-year-old, she can't. I'm not going to sit there and rationalize with her why this is okay, but a fifth of vodka's not. So it was, if that was a non-negotiable, then it had to be a non-negotiable. I mean, obviously, it's always a non-negotiable. I'm not drinking a fifth of vodka while driving, but you understand what I'm saying from her perspective. Yeah, right.
Go, Erica.
I know. It won't be
You
the
got my
first
vote.
time I completely dug myself into, painted myself into a corner. But that's what I figured out, is that it
Right.
can't be. And the ones that get me are the people that don't use manners themselves, but then expect their kids to use their manners. Really?
Yeah.
It's either non-negotiable across the board. I mean, just because I'm the adult, I mean, yes, there's certain things I can do because I'm an adult, but just because I'm an adult, that doesn't somehow absolve me of what I'm trying to teach you to do. And that's the same thing with
And
technology.
that thing of saying,
Yeah.
doing as I say, not as I do doesn't
Oh
count.
my
So I
God,
learn
that
more by
drives me
watching. 'Cause that's the part of the
crazy.
brain that develops first. Is that
Yeah,
simple.
they're
You go
visual.
back to front. That's
Yeah.
right. And they see more than they hear.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, their visual cortex is a lot larger than their auditory cortex. Ours, all of ours are. So, yeah, good point.
My kids call me out when I'm on Facebook too, and I say, "You're right, you're right, you're right." I'm putting it away after I give them a hard time about it.
So, how much time do we have left? Any time? Are we done? Or, because I had just one more.
5 of 8, 5 of 8.
Okay, let me just touch on one last thing before we finish up tonight. I just want to alert you to a few things having to do with what's going on with regulations associated with the media and the pop culture that's coming through to your children. So back in, hold on, let me just find these notes. It was back in the 80s.
There's something here on the second page that I have, section 1.3, media culture's influence on our children's use of drugs and alcohol. I don't know if that's what you're.
Yeah, what I'm looking for is the year that advertising was deregulated.
Marlboro did? Yeah, you have Marlboro 1954.
No, this was, anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is this. The point is that our corporations can advertise to your children through any way, shape, or form, and they are. So this is what happens. Your kids download apps, right? And just the kind of apps that they download themselves are creating profiles of your children. And then advertisers go after your children based on these profiles. And they embed advertising in everything that your children interacts with. So advertising is embedded in Disney movies, it's embedded in the apps they interact with, it's embedded in the games.
Give us an example.
So, for example...
Are you thinking like product placement as one type of thing?
Yeah.
I mean, if your character's smoking a Marlboro cigarette on camera, that Marlboro paid to have that put in the movie. If you can see the brand name on the screen, that's
It's
so.
customized for that child, that.
Well, oh no, not that. I'm just saying in general. No, I don't know about the customization, but just in general, because
So-
you can't advertise on television for cigarettes, but you can put it in a movie. You can put it on a television show. You can see your person smoke on TV, smoke in movies, but you can't advertise. So that's another way they're getting around that regulation.
Right. So let's say your child is downloading a lot of apps that have to do with sports, right? All of a sudden, they're going to be inundated by advertising related to sports. So things, product, other apps, individuals that have blogs, whatever it happens to be, the kids are going to be bombarded by this information. Through
That happens to me too, like if I'm searching, like we were looking for a used car,
Yes.
whatever, typed it in,
Yes.
just on a search, and then the next time I went on to wherever it was,
Yeah.
it kept coming up, I'm like, how'd they know that?
Yeah.
They capture your IP,
It's like
your
all
IP
that
address on your
information that-
computer.
Yeah.
It's just
They send it to you.
these lovely
Follow me
algorithms
as.
are going
Yeah.
on
The entire time.
So you guys remember, this is giving an example of how clever they get. You guys remember the Weekly Reader? Remember the Weekly Reader? Well, in the 80s, the Weekly Reader was owned by R.J. Nabisco. And they started to embed in the stories that were in the Weekly Reader that were being distributed to elementary school children, they started to embed in those stories subliminal messages suggesting that smoking was acceptable, was cool, was this, was that. And so, and here's one of the reasons why. And we see it also with advertising. So, for example, let me give you an example here. This is a quote out of the American Academy of Pediatrics. The so-called war on drugs has been waged by the federal government for decades in a variety of locales, except in the media. In fact, at the same time that parents in school programs are trying to get children and teenagers to just say no to drugs, more than $20 billion worth of cigarette, alcohol, and prescription drug advertising is very effectively working to get them to just say yes. The U.S. government paid for a powerful anti-drug commercial paid to be aired during the 2002 Super Bowl. It was aired right between the 7th and 8th Budweiser commercials. Okay? In fact, watch an alcohol commercial carefully and you can spot 7 myths that advertisers want children and adolescents to believe. And here's some of the myths. Everyone drinks alcohol. Drinking has no risks. Drinking helps solve problems. Alcohol is a magic potion that can transform you. Sports and alcohol go together. If alcohol was truly dangerous, we wouldn't be advertising it. And alcoholic beverage companies promote drinking only in moderation because they have those little disclaimers, right? Similarly, Big Tobacco has engaged in a systematic campaign to attract underage smokers for decades and mislead them to think that smoking is not dangerous. And then they lied to Congress about it. So now we've seen smoking has declined significantly in our youth population. What do you think is the next hot product that companies are going to go after, advertising to children? What do you think it's going to be?
I mean, like now?
Coffee.
Those drinks, caffeine drink things.
Okay,
I think that's already
perhaps, but there's something else.
Marijuana.
Marijuana. So these kids they're searching online for, information on marijuana, this and that, and all of a sudden they're getting advertisements about medical marijuana and about recreational marijuana. They're getting advertisements for T-shirts that have marijuana leaves on them and socks that are marijuana socks and all kinds of stuff. So that's going to be the next big problem. Because we're legalizing recreational marijuana around the country slowly, it's a foregone conclusion, and medical marijuana is now becoming, commonplace. So, and by the way, there's no such thing as medical marijuana. I want you all to know that medical marijuana is recreational marijuana sold as a medicine. The FDA has not approved marijuana as a medicine. So even though we've come up with this term to refer to marijuana as a medicine, there's no such thing as medical marijuana. So I was very unpopular at a conference where I spent all day listening to growers and distributors talk about the benefits of medical marijuana. I was the last speaker. I got up and said, does everyone realize that there is no such thing as medical marijuana?
I guess I just assumed it was marijuana used as medicine. I didn't think it was a different kind.
But the kids don't.
No, and I've heard it really described. It's just a change in dealership.
My daughter went to
It's
React
insane.
last
It's
night.
just-
They talked about that. Scared the hell out of her. She will never, well, who knows, but never try marijuana after that. She said, Mom, it'll kill you the first time. It's not what you guys smoked. I'm like, wait a minute.
Good for her.
That's what she said. She said it's the stuff that the kids are smoking now is nothing
10 times
like what it used to be.
Yeah. Very addictive, too.
How old?
What's that?
How old is she?
15, she's a freshman. So it's React. Morgan
She's
React.
and she's believing it. She's
Yeah.
buying into it.
All right, so the last...
She's never been tested, though. She's never been around,
Yeah.
never been offered.
No, I don't think any of them have yet. But, well, I shouldn't even say that, but
Oh, it's
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
All right, so in conclusion, let me just give you a rundown on my recommendations. First and foremost, be a positive role model, because you're a powerful person in your kids' lives. You are frontline, so be a positive role model. Set healthy boundaries and limits. So what does that mean? No TV, computer, or phone in the bedroom. Monitor the use of all technology. So find a way to do that. There's all kinds of, educate yourself on that. Spend time researching the best apps out there. So do your homework. There's all kinds of resources I gave you. You can look up and check the apps that your kids are using. You could even be one step ahead of them and suggest apps that you think would be really cool, like fun, interesting apps. Set limits that are age appropriate. Spend screen time with your kids. So, if they're on their phone doing something, curl up next to them and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And they'll probably go, But spend time, ask questions, and engage with them.
Sometimes they want to share with you too.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
they see that's really cool.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
fun, yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure, one thing you could do every week is have regularly scheduled unplugged family time. That's a great thing to do. Family time where you're just unplugged, maybe you're playing board games, maybe you're just sitting around having some popcorn, whatever. Bring back boredom. Allow your children to be bored, because when they're bored, they're going to get creative, and that is we're really missing out on that. Think for yourself. This is something that I'm just passionate about. We as parents are getting so much pressure from so many different areas to parent our kids in certain ways. Think for yourself. So if you feel like your child is spending too much screen time, and your child's telling you, "Oh no, but Johnny, he's blah blah," think for yourself. Set those limits. Enforce those limits, because the most powerful thing you can do as a parent is to be consistent. And even if you're consistently wrong, you're still consistent. It's okay to be consistently wrong. The important thing is that you're consistent. So, and that really comes. Listen to your gut. If your child is playing a violent video game and it's just making you sick, get rid of it. "Oh yeah, but Mom, that's all. How am I going to interact with all my buddies are doing that, and he's got the microphone and they're talking and to each other." Well, I'm sorry, dude. You're just going to have to find another way to entertain yourself. But we're not doing that in this family. So if it doesn't feel right, if your gut is really telling you something, listen to it. So the tech talk is becoming the new sex talk. And what I mean by that is nobody really wants to talk about it. It's like, let's not talk about what our kids are doing on technology or what we're doing on technology. It's like going to a cocktail party and talking about how much money you make. Nobody wants to do that. Talk about it. Talk about it with other parents. Talk about it with your teachers. Talk about it with your administrators. Talk about it with your community leaders. We gotta start talking about it, because change isn't there. The kids can't be held responsible for changing this. We have to be responsible for changing it, which means we've got to change our habits first and then change our expectations for them. So, hopefully, chances are their kids, this is my prediction, that our kids' are going to have far more constraints on them than we put on our kids. Because our kids are going to say, as adults, "Oh my God, there's no way I'm allowing this to happen," because they're going to know what it was like. So, and then forgive yourself. Do the best you can. And then just enjoy your children and enjoy the mistakes that you make. Because we're all human. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is
Really,
wonderful.
I mean, the amount of research underpinning the things that you just told us is really astounding to me, and I really appreciate all of the effort, and I have really enjoyed what everybody else
Wonderful.
has to say.
Yeah.
And this is why I wish more people could come, because to me, it would only take one time of them being here and say, you know what, this is really cool.
Let's get everybody to.
Right.
Share
You know,
it
it's
out.
like,
Thank you,
oh my
Alice.
God.
Well, that's why, thank you for
Yeah.
agreeing to let us
Yeah.
record you,
Yeah.
because that makes such
Yes.
a, I mean, that's really, you know,
Everybody's
so
just
many people are so
I had
busy,
flyers
and
out
it's
at
just
Red
getting them
Barn,
to
gave one to
one
every
thing.
family for conference, not one of them is here, not one.
Yeah, and Friends of Pearson changed the meeting tonight.
Yep.
And blasted that out to a large distribution list, so at least people knew about it.
Right.
You know, the one thing that I didn't mention that I do want to say to all of you, and that is that technology use is addictive, and it is the new addiction. We're seeing most of the research is coming out of China because it's epidemic over there. They actually have now treatment facilities that are dedicated to technology addiction. We have one facility in the United States right now, and I think it's in Oregon. I could be wrong about that. You're going to see more of those. We haven't identified technology addiction on our DSM-5 yet, but it will come because it is addictive. And addiction to technology has been shown, the research is showing that it leads to other addictions because the process, it sets up the process of reinforcement in the brain. And these kids, one of these things these kids love to do is engage with technology and get high at the same time. They love to smoke marijuana and then play video games or watch videos on YouTube. Just be cognizant of that. Be well aware of that is a huge issue. I have a couple of people in my practice, young men who are addicted to technology, and they're grown men, and they're not functioning. They're living at home in the basement, and they're playing video games, 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. So it's very, very difficult to treat, and we don't have the facilities that are specializing in that yet in this country. So
There's this one game, is it League of Legends? Does anybody know? Anyway, my son plays it, and it's now there are professionals playing it, and he was telling me about how when you get to be 25 years old, you have to retire because you've got such bad carpal tunnel.
oh, geez.
Because in order to get to the top, there's guys that make like $500,000, if you're on the team that wins the tournament every year. And I was like, what do you mean they have to retire at 25? And he's like, oh, terrible carpal tunnel. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I just think,
And these video games are set up to reinforce. So, they've studied Pavlov's dog, all right, and they know how to get these kids hooked. So these kids not only get addicted to the game itself, but they get addicted to the immediate reinforcement. And so they have no tolerance for discomfort. So when you're trying to get them to do something that makes them uncomfortable, like go do some information interviewing or get a resume together and get it online, and it is really challenging because the reinforcement isn't going to come until further down the road. They're not going to get it right away, and these kids are really getting conditioned to expect that immediate feedback, that immediate reinforcement, and it's affecting their motivation.
Is that the 21 age limit too, or if it's if they're past that 21 years?
so later they
old?
start.
So you're hoping, I don't know about that. The research, I don't know that there's any research out there on that yet, but I would suggest to you that there's a much better chance because their prefrontal cortexes are nearing development, and their reasoning skills are better intact, and they're not as susceptible. So it would make sense. Addiction is addiction when you look in the brain. Some of the damage that we're seeing to the gray matter in the brain with technology addiction is equal and comparable to cocaine addiction. So when you look at a cocaine addict's brain and you look at an individual who's addicted to technology, you're going to see the same damage.
Wow. Amazing.
That's amazing. That is.
Yeah,
I never would have thought that.
yeah.
It's an epidemic.
It is an epidemic, and you're going to hear about it as an epidemic. Yep.
And like you said, I mean, there's conversation starting, but there's nowhere near.
We're in its infancy.
Yeah.
We're in its infancy. We don't have
That's
a
all
lot of.
still a big experiment, right?
It's a huge experiment.
Right.
And it's difficult, as you pointed out, you made a really great point. It's really hard as a parent these days because you don't know what to do. You don't know where those lines need to be. And nobody can really tell you because we don't have enough data. But what
we have some guidelines that,
we
they're
have,
consistent.
absolutely.
about
What I always say is use your common sense.
Yeah.
Use your common sense. So my philosophy when I parented and in my practice is back to basics, man.
I guess sometimes I question my common sense, which you shouldn't, but only because it's the whole generation.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing if it's one thing and you're like, oh, okay, but it's because it's so big. It's like the masses coming at you that this is the way it is. This is the way we operate, Mom. This is the generation. I'm like, oh, wow.
So
is
true.
it?
I took a minivan full of girls to the soccer game in Portland, 7th graders. I was so thrilled to have them all to myself. Every single one of them was on their phones. And I said, ladies, put him away.
Good for you.
Put him away. My daughter's horrified.
Yep.
Horrified.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Were
Yeah,
they talking
they're
to
not
each other?
talking, no, they're
They
not,
talking to each
that's the
other?
problem.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Can't you just talk to them?
Yeah, I'm like, everybody's here. Who are you on Instagram looking for?
Right, exactly.
And my son's in the autistic spectrum, and he's just started his freshman year of college, and so he's in this group, this LLC, and they had a trip. We're in a corn maze. I'm like, Reg, it's a great opportunity to interact with people. We always talk about social opportunities.
Yes.
You know, I'm trying to get him involved in any whatever. And so I said, how was the bus ride? He says, wasn't so great. I said, why? He says, everyone I talked to was on their phone. They had earbuds in. They were all to themselves, though, up and back.
Yep.
You know, I'm like, what great time. You know, on the times we had on buses, on field trips, and
right.
going to events. And
Right.
No.
You know,
Right.
it does take one child to, in a peer group, to say, not cool, put them away,
Yeah.
or not right now.
Gosh,
Yeah.
who's doing that, though, Andrea?
Yeah.
And don't fall
Very
for that thing that
few.
everybody's doing it, because not everybody's doing it.
No.
Kids
No.
want you to believe everybody's doing
Right.
it, but they're not. They're not all doing
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Be a parent.
My
Say
daughter
no.
tells me every night, everybody has Snapchat, Mom. Everybody. I said, well, you don't.
There you go.
Our parents these days, and I had it in my notes, and you just made the point, we don't say no. You ought to look for chances to say no as a parent, just to get your kid accustomed to hearing no.
Absolutely,
It's fun. I had a
absolutely.
conversation recently, I said, I am a yes to everything, and you're still giving me a hard time. Like, enough now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I, particularly, I have 2 daughters, and I always think of the power of no from the female perspective.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget. I had a student in my class. You guys will appreciate this. I had a student in my lifespan class years ago, and her daycare center was going through NIAC certification.
Yep.
And at the time, one of the guidelines is your staff members will not use no, the word no, with your students. They will use redirection, blah blah. The whole. And I was like dumbfounded. Literally, I said, but don't you understand how powerful that word is? I mean, for anybody, but particularly, the whole no means no thing. Like, how do we expect it? Because then our daughters turn 13, 14, and we start teaching them no means no, and they're looking at you like, I don't know what you're saying to me right now.
Yeah.
Why? Because we never use the word. Like, how do you not understand how powerful that word is? How do you not understand how powerful that word is as a parent?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just going to be no. It's that simple. I don't have to rationalize it with you. I don't have to give you my thought process.
Yeah.
But there
I
is
said no, that's it. Like, how do we not understand people? How do we not understand how powerful that is?
I know.
I mean, I was horrified. I was like, I cannot
Yeah.
believe.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
I
Instead of
cannot-
no running, we're supposed to say walking. No
Right,
yelling,
right,
inside
exactly. But I'm
voice.
like, how we're missing such a rich opportunity to teach our kids how important that word is. And yes, you're going to get it. I understand. You're going to get it back at you countless times, while you're raising your kids, but
Well, that's
maybe
your
that's not a
job.
bad thing.
That's your job.
You know,
Blame
yeah.
it on me, I always say. Blame it.
Yeah.
I was the health educator. I knew I was going to find out everything in town anyways, so you better keep your nose clean. So, but you're right. Like you said before, sometimes they appreciate that. Yeah, I'd like to, but if my mother finds out,
Yep.
gives them an
I
out.
actually had a social emotional seminar, and the professor was the mother of 4 boys, and that's what she used to do. She's like, I gave them all the out, like the water bottle thing. So she told her kid, take your own, it was like when water bottles, like refillable water bottles first became in vogue. She's like, take it filled with water and tell all your friends it's vodka. And no one will know the difference, but you won't feel pressured to drink anything. And if it's a beer drinking crowd, bring your own apple juice, whatever it is. But that was her deal, And if it comes down to it, say my mother will kill me if, I get caught doing X, Y, or Z. That's okay. I can be the heavy. I have no problem with that.
Exactly. Be a
Well,
parent.
I have no problem with
and
that.
what's happening a lot now, at least
Go to Scouts.
across the street at the high school, is kids are using their phones to cheat on tests.
That's your
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have notes on their phone, and teachers don't see them looking at their phone.
Yeah, I have no technology on test days under any circumstances. If you need technology, you go take it at the testing center and let them monitor what you're actually looking at. But in my classroom, there's no. If you're expecting a call,
think
I will
phones-
hold your phone
I
for
think
you,
when
and
have a
I will
test,
come get
phones
you.
should be
Yeah, and they don't get any. They're not allowed any technology. They can't leave it on the table. They can't. It has to be away.
So what we need to do, we have a responsibility as parents, is to parent our children for the future, not parent them in the moment. So we need to recognize what it is they need to be able to accomplish when they walk out of our house. And they need the skills to do that. So what do they need? They need persistence. They need resilience. They need grit. They need these basic fundamental characteristics. And they can apply to any situation that comes up for them. And that's what we're finding they don't have. So when you talk to, and I talk to a lot of people in corporate America who are hiring these kids, and there's a large corporation here in Connecticut. I was talking to a senior VP there, and she said, I'm telling you, Alicia, you could make $1 million if you could come up with a way to motivate these individuals. Because we're hiring these kids out of college. They're well educated, they're intelligent, they on resume, they're incredibly accomplished. They look amazing. And they walk in the door and they can't work. They can't work. So she was telling me this one example, this young lady, and they can't fire them because they need them to fill jobs in this particular corporation. She was telling me this young lady who was hired her credentials were impeccable. And she was in sales for this company. So she wasn't really doing her job, and they came to her, and her manager came to her and said to her, so here's the deal. Maybe you don't really understand what you're supposed to be doing. So what you're supposed to be doing is you're supposed to prospect. So you've got to go out and you have to find people that might be interested in what we have to sell, and then you sell it to them. And she said to him, well, why don't you just tell me who those people are, and then I'll sell to them. And he said, no, you don't understand. Part of your job is to go out and find these people. She's like, well, I'm not going to do that. Why don't you give me a list of people, and then I'll go and I'll sell to them. And so what she was saying is happening in the corporate environment is that these kids are managing their managers because they don't have, there's no way to motivate them. You can incentivize them. So they have this particular company has an older sales force. And all the older individuals are scrappy, man. They go out there and they figure stuff out and they make things happen. And the kids are all just sitting there like, okay, well, let me know when it's time for me to do what I'm supposed to do. Wow. And they can't, they'll say, okay, we'll give you a bonus if you get to this number, or we'll do this. And they don't respond. It doesn't affect them at all. It doesn't motivate them. They can't figure out what to do.
Well, when your pay is related to that, it will incentivize them.
Doesn't.
No, because actually, Mark says that all the time because, obviously his agency is they're understaffed. They need a certain degree of overtime to be able to provide the services that they're supposed to provide. and the last few classes of trainees that have come out will not work overtime. He said, which sounds great on the surface of it. They'll work their 40 hours, they'll do what they have to do, and then they'll go home. But the problem is now everybody else is kind of picking up that workload because, and he's like, are you serious? Like, you realize this increases your pay, right? You realize this increases your pay. It could possibly increase your pension. There's a lot of reasons why this is a good thing to do, but they just have no interest.
You find the same thing in education.
Yeah.
You have the teachers at my end of the scale who did everything, and one's coming here like, I'm not doing that. 301, I'm home. Find someone else to do it. And it's hard to find people to step up and do that. But
Yeah.
Well, back to the sales force, it reminds me of something you said earlier, it's the whole comfort zone. So I think part of our job is to allow our kids to be uncomfortable, as you said.
Yes.
Right.
So we have to learn, excellent point, we have to learn as parents to tolerate our children's discomfort. Our generation of parents don't have tolerance for our kids' discomfort. They get uncomfortable, they cry, they kick and scream, they, have a little bit of anxiety, and we're like, okay, all right, well, it's okay, honey, that's all right, we'll fix that, or I'll call the teacher, and, we'll sort through this. Let them be uncomfortable. Walk away. Let them struggle. Let them figure it out, exactly, because life, as we all know, now we're in our advanced years, we've been through a lot of life. Life is difficult, and they're not prepared for that.
I mean, even if it's as simple as going back to the teacher to discuss that grade you thought should have been something different, or it's the wrong grade on Power School, and go back to the teacher and things like that, or going up to the bank teller and doing your own banking, and each time stepping back further until they go into the bank alone. And
so never do for your children, no matter how old they are, never do for your kids what they can do for themselves. And don't do for your kids what they can almost do for themselves. So that way you're pushing them, right? You're challenging them. And you think about what that is in terms of what's developmentally appropriate. And if you think in that way, first of all, your life gets a whole hell of a lot easier because you're not doing so much. Second of all, your children are responsible for taking care of themselves on a level that builds their self-esteem. That's what builds their self-esteem, is their ability to do. I did not do this with my son. I wish I had, and that is something I'm going to recommend to you. Make sure that your kids have to do something that they don't like to do in the house. So the perfect thing is to clean the toilets. Because these kids don't have any tolerance for doing anything they don't want to do, or that's something that is uncomfortable for them, or is gross, or this, or they're just completely spoiled that way. They're totally, make them do something that's gross. Make them do something that they don't like to do. It's fabulous for them. And don't let them out of it. Don't,
I could see my daughter, or even my son, saying, how much do I get?
Yeah.
Get use of your phone and you get use of
get to live in my house, eat my food.
Yeah.
I got to run, but
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
If you have any questions or comments, or you need any resources that you can't find here, let me know, and I'll
Great, thank you.
help you out.
Yeah, you were great. I remember seeing you last time thinking, I gotta get